memoir, Everything, Nothing, Someone, a New York Times editor's choice, and Indie Next Pick. And among Real Simple and Kirkus's best books of 2023. Her writing has appeared in New York Magazine, Oprah Daily, and the New York Times. She lives in Amagansett, New York, and Nashville, Tennessee. Great.
Please welcome Alice.
Please welcome Alice.
Hi, everybody. So I don't know how many of you have read the book, but I'll give a little synopsis. So here it is. Here I am. Hello, is this right? Okay. I tell the story of being the daughter of two self-absorbed, self-destructive artists who were the center of their own universe and believed they were the exception to every rule. My mother was a famous painter whose implanted false memories of satanic sexual abuse made her hide in her work and be distanced from other people. My father was a European sex symbol, film star, and radical who treated parenthood like a philosophical experiment in the total annihilation of boundaries. So I was flooded with the kind of torrential force of their impulses and desires, and I became everything. And then when I reached adolescence, a dissociative episode wiped out the last puff of diffuse selfhood I had, and I became nothing. I couldn't recognize my face in the mirror. I didn't know where the sound of my own voice was coming from. I was disconnected from my body, my mind, my feelings, my history. I was convinced I didn't exist. And psychiatrists responded to this by prescribing more and more psychotropic medication until this cocktail of meds triggered a massive psychotic episode that lasted a year and nearly killed me. And the only things that kept me tethered to myself and to reality were writing, and then eventually my partner of 16 years, Gregory. And his fastidious care and optimism taught me how to turn outwards, how to connect with other people, how to care for my mother when she was diagnosed with dementia, how to confront and reconcile with my very problematic father, and how to help me write myself into a place where I could feel and feel for others. And I became someone. So I will read first the opening set piece and then a scene of one of my first dissociative episodes. My mother's disembodied voice came through the intercom. Alice, Alice, or maybe it was Alice, Alice, or maybe it was Alice, Alice. If I couldn't get to the phone fast enough, she'd hang up, and then I couldn't call her back because she kept her phone on privacy mode. She could reach me, but I couldn't reach her. I had to go looking for her to find out what she wanted. By the time I found her, she didn't seem to care why she had called me in the first place. Maybe my mother was just a voice in my head. Maybe I was just a figment of her imagination. She had put her bed in the third floor pool room, which had a fireplace and views of her lush garden. During the day, she was below me, painting in one of her two downstairs studios, and at night she was above me in the pool room with her bottle of white wine and her books. My bedroom was below the pool room on the second floor. The pool held 90 tons of water, and I could feel it all balancing over my head. As I lay in bed at night, I pictured the ceiling giving way. I wondered at the shape that water would take once it was cut loose from its parameters, violently free. The intercom connected us within the massive house in New York City. Our address was 134 Charles Street, between Greenwich and Washington Streets in the West Village. We never got the numbers put on the door, so there was just a torn piece of paper with 134 written on it, taped to the inside of the glass. It was a 17,000 square foot, 3-story building with a concrete facade, large windows, and steel doors. The building used to be a factory for manufacturing train parts back in the days when trains ran along the west side of the island. On the ground floor was an office and a gigantic studio, which led via a spiral staircase to an even bigger basement studio where my mother painted every day from 6 a.m. until 7 p.m. with a 2-hour nap in the middle of the day. Between the office and the upper studio was a small room where my father lived after my mother kicked him out of her bed and before she kicked him out of the house. It was also where my Uncle Roy came to die, where Max hemorrhaged and Michael wept. It was where people came to lock themselves in and fall apart. The building had huge windows that let the world see us as we moved through the house. Once, for one of her lavish parties, my mother had the staff light hundreds of votive candles and line them along the windows. In the middle of the party, firemen in full gear stormed into the house thinking it was burning down. A neighbor had misinterpreted the chic flicker of tiny candles as a deadly blaze. Or perhaps they had seen something in us, identified a threat that we couldn't see ourselves. On the second floor was my bedroom, a second room which I called my study, Nanny's room, the library with a fireplace and rolling ladders that extended to the ceiling for access to the walls of books, the kitchen where Katie the cook prepared our meals, and the living room with another fireplace and a wall of windows that looked out onto a garden. Nanny was Eileen Dennis Maynard, who went by Dennis but was only ever called Nanny. She existed to everyone like a paper doll Mary Poppins, two-dimensional, her life beginning and ending as the British governess paid to raise me. To me, she was a mother, the one who could be fired and disappear at any moment. The garden on the second floor had fruit trees and a koi pond and a spiral staircase covered in roses that ascended to another garden with a grape arbor and apple trees. My mother liked to be surrounded by things that were growing because she always felt she was killing things, that if she touched something, it would die. There was a tool shed like on a farm. I'd never been to a farm, but I imagine that's what a farm was like, but right on top of the building in the middle of Manhattan. I liked to go in there and smell the fecund fussiness of the shed. The bags of fertilizer, rusting tools, and drying twigs created a tranquilizing fog that curled itself between me and the city below. Our world had all the disparate components of the world from which we were disconnected: steel and trees, fire and water, soil and decomposition. There were no locks on the doors inside the house. The doors were just sheets of opaque glass and steel frames. Not even the bathroom doors had locks. Nanny once walked in on me masturbating and said, "Oh dear, I forgot you were a woman now," and walked out. Nanny once walked in on me cutting myself and cried. No locks meant I couldn't say, "Keep out." When I was 6, I put a no smoking sign on my door. It didn't work. My parents were both chain smokers, and their smoke entered the room before they did, making my eyes water and my throat itch. Only mythic beings could do that, make their presence known inside another person's body. The boundaries were porous. In this house, one could not tell the difference between fantasy and reality, art and object, parent and child. In this house, I couldn't tell what I was to my mother. In this house, I couldn't tell if I was my father's daughter, wife, or mother. The bathroom attached to my bedroom had 2 entrances, one from the hallway and one from my room. When my mother had parties and I was in my room, people sometimes didn't notice the door connecting to my bedroom and didn't close it, so I could hear them pee. Sometimes I could even see them if the mirror door reflected into my bedroom. I liked to watch them, and I liked the moment when they realized they had been seen. There would be a fat pause as they tried to remember what sounds they had made or what parts of them had been exposed. They would clear their throat before they zipped or yanked up their pants before fabric fell back over knees. In this house, our most secret selves and our most private moments were meant to be spectated and thought about. The toilet flushed with an intensity that made me jump every time. The taps of the sink and bathtub and shower were marked C and F for chaud and froid, the French words for hot and cold. People unfamiliar with the house often scalded themselves when they washed their hands. The house forced you to move differently. It could be a bewildering, even harmful place if you didn't know its rules. It was as if I lived inside my mother's mind. Everything had been designed especially for her and her alone. The space was built to accommodate the particularities and peculiarities of her gestures and habits. The house had many horizontal surfaces: daybeds, kitchen counters, spacious hearths, hardwood floors on which she could assume her typical recumbent pose, on her side, arm cocked to prop up her head while smoking or reading or talking on the phone. She spread herself out on these domestic plateaus like Manet's Olympia, and life lived itself around her. She had transformed this place from a factory into a fortress, an irresistible nexus of strangeness, luxury, and niche functionality, the architecture of my mother's desires. Everything around us had her in it. She designed her own jewelry. A gemologist who rode a unicycle and had worked with the Hope Diamond was her collaborator, the pieces so elaborate that they tested the limits of engineering. She designed her own very uncomfortable furniture. She designed and commissioned our drinking glasses, hand-blown cylinders, so light you could hardly tell there was anything in your hand. The concept behind them was to create something as close to nothing as possible, but still be functional. I hated them because I couldn't stop breaking them. And I had to use them because they were part of the fundamental routine of my life, which meant destroying them would also have to be a fundamental routine of my life. Even the most utilitarian aspects of our lives were impossible to negotiate, conceptualized beyond utility, aestheticized beyond the physics of living. Now, this is a scene from, I've just graduated high school and I've been dissociating, and this is the first major dissociative episode I have that ends up lasting 2 years. I moved blankly through unstructured days. I looked up stripping jobs in the city. I researched writing letters to death row convicts. I sat in my room, wondering if lonely men waiting to die in a club or in prison could give me purpose. I didn't have the follow-through for either activity. During the day, I sat in my room trying to write and listening to Nanny talk to herself in the kitchen. Nanny, now 77, had retired, and my mother had invited her to live with us for the remainder of her life. Nanny was lonely, and her disembodied voice sneaked her loneliness into me, past my door with no lock, until I was crowded with both of our alienation, jam-packed with an emptiness that would grow bigger than I could have ever imagined. I was trying to be normal. And what normal looked like was hanging out with a guy with a soul patch and taking a giant hit from a bong, which I'd never done. I inhaled deeply and held my breath for as long as I could. As I exhaled, I felt the smoke take everything I was with it. I heard myself say, whoa, 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 over and over. I couldn't stop saying whoa, as if the sound would somehow adhere me to the body I was now far, far away from. I crawled to the bathroom, locked myself inside, and lay on the floor. I stared at the warning on the side of a bottle of Clorox spray that lay under the sink a few inches away from my face. I tried to read the words over and over again, but I had no idea what contact with eyes or call poison control meant, and the less sense they made, the more panicked I became. My body boomed with heartbeats, an empty, shuddering shell on the floor of a bathroom. I touched my face, my arm, trying to convince myself that the membrane between inside and outside was still intact. The feeling of my skin on me made me sick, and I began to vomit. I flushed the toilet, and it started to overflow. I slid slowly across the floor as the water inched toward me. When it finally reached me, I opened the door, ran through the living room and out the front door. I ran barefoot through the streets, the guy with the soul patch running after me. A cop car drove by, and I flagged it down. Soul Patch told them I had smoked weed and needed to go to the emergency room. Could they take me? The cops told him that they could, but they would also have to arrest me. Take a cab, I was advised. Soul Patch hailed a cab as I sat in the fetal position on the curb. I was sent home from St. Vincent's Hospital with a piece of paper telling me about panic attacks, but I knew it was something more. I went to sleep that night, hoping unconsciousness would reverse the horrifying depletion that had taken place. But I awoke the next morning and fell, breathless, into a room I could barely recognize, a body I could barely feel, and a mind I could barely follow into perception. The unmistakable arrhythmia of the disconnect, as I had begun to call it, that had been disrupting my life, was now louder, more insistent, a second heart that beat along with my original heart, out of time, out of body. Thank you. Hello. How are you?
Yeah. If you guys turn them on, it will go from red to green.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
No.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I
So
loved your
psyched to
book.
be here. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. That makes me happy.
I read it in the spring and it was just great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I know it's a strange look to start off with.
Strange looks are the only looks that are acceptable in my life. So that is perfectly great.
Oh,
Whatever is strange that's about to happen, I'm in for it.
well, this is someone else's book.
Okay.
And
Plot twist. Wasn't expecting that.
I just started reading it, and it's called A Fan's Notes by Frederick Exley. I don't know if you know it, but it's a work of auto fiction from the early 60s. I think it was published in 68. And it's about the writer and his struggles with alcoholism and mental illness and his deep, endless obsession, his love for the New York Giants.
Oh, okay.
But he's in and out of, these 1950s institutions, and it's a mess, and he's on tranquilizers, and he's undergoing insulin shock treatment, which I didn't know much
I've never
about.
heard of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And electroconvulsive therapy, but back then it was less politically correct, and electroshock. But there's this great blurb on the back from the poet and novelist James Dickey, that guy who wrote Deliverance.
Yeah.
And he says, "This is the horrible and hilarious account of a long failure, but a failure which turns into success, the success that this book is. A Fan's Notes is one man's life, written with brilliance and insight. No one should have had Exley's life, and no one who has read it can ever forget it." So I felt kind of the same way about your book.
Yeah.
Has anyone told you that before?
I think I've
Other readers?
connected it to that kind of quote. Well, I've told myself that. I mean, it begins with the Hölderlin quote, "Where danger is, grows that which saves also."
Oh, right.
And I found it's really, one of the things that nearly destroyed me was the dissociation. But it was also, I'm so sorry, it's been a really crazy day. And during these things, I have these moments where I just completely float away. And I kind of go, I really hope whoever is left behind can fucking handle this. And right now I have completely floated away. So you are seeing a live demonstration of a dissociative episode. So I'm just gonna take a second to come back in here. But it's really interesting because the dissociation nearly destroyed me, but then it was precisely what allowed me to rebuild myself from the raw materials of my life. I mean, without the dissociation, I wouldn't have confronted my father. So my father behaved very inappropriately. He, as I said in the beginning, really wanted to test the limits of parenthood. And he did things like make me lick the tears from his eyes, or wanted to revolutionize cinema by having a father and daughter star as love interests and have a sex scene on screen. So I ended up confronting him right after another dissociative episode that nearly killed me. And it was precisely because the dissociation had made my boundaries so incredibly porous that I was able to listen to him, believe in him, believe in my own experiences, and then learn that many things can be true at the same time and how to stay coherent in that revelation. So that's what really strikes me with the quote, with the blurb you just read. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really powerful scene towards the end with your father in Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is so tremendous about the dissociation in this book is that it's both metaphor and a condition.
Yeah. I already have something to say.
Yeah.
So this really cool thing happened while I was writing, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question at all. I barely listened to the question, but it was so interesting. But after I landed on the title, I was able to go back and see all of the poetry and the parallels that were just lying scattered around my life. And it took on this poignancy and this narrative significance that I hadn't seen. And in reading my own life back as a person who is perpetually depersonalized, I started noticing all of these instances of a kind of little cosmic gift of metaphor disguised as these strange occurrences in my life. And two examples. One is the, to me, iconic intestinal worm in a mental institution. So I'm in this mental institution. I believe that I don't exist. And to explain dissociation more thoroughly, I also feel like there's a scrim between me and everyone else, between me and my feelings, between me and my body. It feels like whoever I was has retreated far back to the back of my skull and is peering out at a completely unrecognizable world, and then peering in at an unrecognizable mind. So I'm in this mental institution, convinced I don't exist and convinced I don't have a body. And all of a sudden I excrete a worm. And it was like my body was telling me, no, there is something alive inside of you. Even though you feel completely dead, even though you feel non-extant, there is something alive inside of you. And it felt like the universe was going, okay, you don't understand what's going on. You can't speak the language of corporeality, because I've used language my whole life to like cram myself into corporeality. So I'm going to give you something that is more like physical poetry. Like I'm going to give you this metaphor of this worm. And I'm going to give you this metaphor that you literally pulled out of your ass. And that was such a moment. And then I had this other moment where, again, it was this intersection of, it was like a cosmic gift of metaphor, where at the end, my mother has been given 2 weeks to live, and I go and I take care of her. And she always loved the ocean, and she would start panicking. And to calm her down, I would say, do you want to go to the ocean? And she'd say yes. And I'd say, are the waves calm or is it rough? And she'd say calm. And I'd say, can you see to the bottom or is it obscured? And she'd answer. And then I said, how far out are you going to go? And she said, as far as I can go. And then I said, do you want someone to swim with you? And she said, no, I want to be alone. And then she said, I want to swim out there and never come back. And then she died the next day. And it was this moment where I thought, God, it was like in this moment of death and separation, we were collaborating in a language we both spoke, which was metaphor.
Yes.
So I keep encountering these moments in my life of, wow, there's a perfect metaphor for the entire trajectory of my life.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers what you were wondering about, but that's what it made me think of.
In the book, I was so taken with Austin Briggs.
Austin Riggs, yeah.
Riggs. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you miss it?
Oh my, wow. That's a fantastic, no one's ever asked me that. Wow. My first instinct was no, but then.
Such an incredible place in a way.
Well, define incredible.
Nowhere else like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of like being nostalgic for being in the womb.
Mhm.
It was just this place where you were like enwombed by luxury and no accountability and just absolutely onanistic introspection. I mean, it was just like, talk about yourself. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then it was just, have this incredible meal. I mean, it was just, people were encouraged to be there for as long as they had money to pay for it. There was one person who was there for 10 years. And when I left, I was there for a year and 3 months. And when I left, okay, I'll admit I needed to be I needed help, but they said, we hope to see you back here. And they've said that to everybody from what I've learned upon leaving. So, I mean, I miss having no accountability for anything. But no, I mean, it was a hugely destructive place. That was the moment. That was an inflection point where when I left Austin Riggs, they referred me to a psychiatrist who, upon meeting me for 45 minutes, sent me home with a prescription for 90 Klonopin and 90 Adderall. And the only instructions he gave me were take the Adderall. The Adderall wears off every 4 hours, and take the Klonopin whenever you feel anxious. Adderall made me anxious. So I'd take the Adderall every 4 hours, and then I'd take the Klonopin as instructed. And then that escalated to me being on a cocktail of 9 medications. So everybody I know who went there, it did irrevocable harm. I have not met one person that it's helped.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's still around.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but I am also, I'm, it happened, and
Yeah.
it's part of it. So, yeah. But I miss it as anyone would miss being exempt from everything. That was nice.
Yeah. I think it was on the Bret Easton Ellis podcast where you said that you you have so much love and empathy for both of your parents at the end. But you just can't find that for the doctors, the psychiatrists.
Mhm.
Yeah. And what I think is so incredible about this book is that it's even actually the house you grew up in Charles Street, but how, you make a character out of the house, but you also make a character out of the pills.
Mm-hmm.
And they're almost like, the real villain of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually have kept every pill bottle I've been prescribed since 2001. And they live in garbage bags in my attic. I have no idea what prompted me to hold on to them.
Mm-hmm.
But now I reached out to my psychiatrist before this book was published to ask him, can you give me a list of every fucking med you put me on? And he said, oh no, those records have been destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
I called Walgreens. I called every pharmacy I'd ever been to. I said, give me a list. No one could give me a list of what I endured. So the only evidence I had were these pill bottles. So these 2 garbage bags are like family members. They're like pets almost. So you're exactly right. And I wanted to do something with them. So I did a little photo shoot where we filled a bathtub with them. And I was in the bathtub covered by these pill bottles. And it was incredibly moving, harrowing moment because I was physically being crushed by these pill bottles. And it was breathtaking in the same way that, my palpitations and my boiling, whooshing blood was sort of breathtaking when I was on all these pills. So you're exactly right. I still live with not only the consequences of the pills, but their carcasses in my attic.
Yeah, I thought it was really something how you were able to turn Adderall and Klonopin into like real characters, real people in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's very
As well
low.
as the house.
Yeah. Well, it's very lonely being that medicated because I couldn't, I couldn't listen. My personality was completely hijacked. I couldn't pick up on social cues. I was so self-consumed that it was extremely lonely. So the pills they populated my life.
Were you writing when you were on that medication?
No, I tried. I would write a lot about how I couldn't write.
Yeah.
So this is my journal. It's like, I'm a writer who doesn't write right now. And I was really thrilled with that line. So it was incredibly devastating to not be able to write. And I couldn't read very well on it.
Yeah.
So it's completely alienating. It's like an abusive relationship where you're being alienated from everything that's important in your life.
Couldn't read on the Adderall.
I mean, I was able to get some school reading done, but for pleasure, absolutely not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. I got all my questions here for you.
They're great questions. I love it.
Thank you. Now, here's a good one.
Okay.
The author Dennis Cooper has described his work as an interrogation of the inadequacy of language. And I wonder if that resonates with you and your description of the dissociative experience. Whether at any point in your writing you felt that language was just not enough to convey that experience.
Oh, well, I mean, dissociation is notoriously language averse. It's so hard to describe it. And speaking to other people who dissociate, that's the main problem. That's how you get the misdiagnoses, because people think you're psychotic. People think you're anything but simply not there.
Yeah.
And I think, but sometimes it was precisely that challenge that kept me tethered to the world, because I kept going, oh my God, I have to find the word. I have to find the word. And the struggle to find the word was enough to keep me here. And I think that I really struggled with the limits of language, also with the happy parts. The happy parts were the hardest to write. I don't know why. I think maybe it was because if I made it real, it would somehow end or be taken away, or I didn't quite believe.
Doesn't fit.
Yeah, or it doesn't, or I still can't believe that things turned out okay.
Yeah.
And it was partially because of this obsession with language and this need to communicate that saved me and made it all possible.
Yeah. With the dissociation, it's like the words aren't there, but even if they were, it wouldn't be enough.
Well, because I'm not there.
Yeah.
So even if the words are there, they're pretty inert unless you have someone, using them. So it's this dance where it's sort of, in a word, I'll catch my reflection. The reflection I can't recognize in real life. When I have the right word, I go, oh, I recognize this. It's a moment of recognition that's so elusive and so rare for me. And that's why I feel safest when I'm writing. It's the only place I feel safe to make a decision. Because the dissociation is like an embodiment of doubt. It's like the visceral experience of doubt. Anything can be what it is, and also its exact opposite. And that's death in writing. So, because I have to commit to a word on a page, and it's the only place I feel safe to know myself or what the hell I'm doing.
No. And then also with the self-harm in the novel, it comes across as such a legitimate reaction.
Thank you. I thought so. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think I started cutting when I was 7, and it was before I'd heard about it. I just somehow knew that it would work, and it did. Yeah. Until it didn't. But yeah, it was something that made, for a 7-year-old to intuitively come up with something that effective. I mean, regardless of it being destructive and a terrible idea, I think it was almost like a sophisticated solution in a weird way.
Here's a craft question.
Mm.
Mhm. So it's my understanding that this project was originally a collection of interconnected short stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was originally a collection of short stories about every time I'd brought someone to an emergency room or hospital or been there. And it was extremely clinical. It had no feeling, no context. A few words misused. And then I got sober.
Mm-hmm.
And so first I got off the meds, then I got sober. And then I was, and it started out because the writing was really just to stay alive. It was triage. And then I got sober, I got off the meds, and then it became about turning outwards and connecting with other people. And I also have a secret weapon, which is my partner, Gregory. He is able to crack things open emotionally. He knows exactly what a person and a story needs emotionally. And also the way that I edited it was to read the manuscript aloud to him 7 times. And he would pace back and forth. And then he'd go, wait, what are you trying to say? How do you feel? And then I would shout sentences at him until one of us would go, that's it. And then we'd high five. So it really became about human connection, where before it was about complete and utter alienation. And I had this collection of short stories, and then I had the dissociative episode. And then that's what caused me to confront my father. And I said, I flew to Paris and I said, this is everything you've done to me. This is every time I felt violated and unsafe. And he responded with such humility, such appropriate shame. And it gave me my family back.
And it let you write this.
Exactly.
Right.
And then that was a 700-page separate book. And then I had to combine them both.
Wow.
Which was,
must have been some process.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there was a real difference in the writer that wrote the short stories and the writer that put this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely and absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I have an unbelievable editor too. So that's another secret weapon.
But also, I mean, did finding your nanny's journal, was that
all of the source material was
very instructive?
Unbelievably.
Yeah.
I mean, all the notebooks I kept, my nanny's journals. So I found out that my mother had been a victim of the satanic panic, which was a moral hysteria in the 80s and 90s, where people were convinced that satanic cults were sexually abusing children. And people went to jail for it, daycare workers, parents, and then overzealous clinicians started suggesting to their patients with sort of diffuse symptoms of trauma that they had been used in satanic sex cults. So when I was 11 years old, I was snooping through my mom's things to find a witness list for my dad to see who she was going to call as witnesses for the divorce trial that lasted 10 years. And I came across her journals. And in the journals, there was a line that said, while I was giving Mathieu is my father, while I was giving Mathieu a blowjob, I had a flashback of Russell holding my head under the water as I threw up, saying, "You're feeding the fishes." And my mom came up to take the 2-hour nap that she took every day. And I said, "What does this mean?" And then she very matter-of-factly told me the following story. She said, when I was a child, my 1.5-year-old brother and I were used in a satanic sex cult that was led by a married couple named Bertie and Russell. They raped us, and they used all of the children of the maids in the neighborhood in ritualized orgies. And they murdered a 7-year-old boy through erotic asphyxiation and made me bury the body on the beach and told me if I ever told, I would go to jail. And then she went and took her nap. And I sat there wondering how to spell erotic asphyxiation and thinking, what a story. And she had done 107 paintings based on this abuse. And they hung in our hallways. So I went out and I looked at this painting and I understood the power of telling a story and then going to take a nap.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What's also
So yes, to answer your question, I had these journals. I had Nanny's journals. I had my journals. I had my father. My father has kept a journal every day of his life since 1960. So when we met, I had a giant duffel bag full of all of my journals and I slapped them on the table. And then he slapped down an even huger pile of journals that like defeated my pile of journals. So it was extraordinary because I'd say something and he'd go, no, you didn't say that when you were 7 years old. In 1993 at 3 p.m. we were here and you said this. And it was this moment where, talk about a metaphor, it was just the way that my parents' realities or lack of reality were just ate me up. And I never knew what was really me and what was really them. And I never felt ownership over my own experiences or over my own story.
Yeah.
And I think I've always been writing because the journals are because I've always metabolized my experiences through storytelling. I mean, I thought in the third person when I was little. I would say she is walking down the street, the ripple. I even have scraps of notes that my mom wrote herself when she was losing her memory. So, yeah.
Yeah, the third person of it.
Yeah.
Robert, do I have to?
Yeah, let's go to the audience and see who has
Oh,
a question.
Hi. Yeah. Oh, you call, I call? Okay. Sorry.
Well, I have to share you with them now. But
Okay.
I could keep going forever.
Thank you so much. Those were some of the best questions I've been asked. So thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, actually, it was really fun. It started out with a panic attack and it ended not with a panic attack. So thank you.
You back down?
Yeah, totally. I'm having fun now. Yeah.
All right. Any questions?
Hi. Yeah.
Give you this small bag.
The blinds too. I'm gonna drink water. It's my voice is gonna get raspy. Wonderful. Hi, Aisha.
Hi.
So this is a twofold question. First, you started writing this, the 700-page manuscript, in a very different headspace from the first. What was it like revisiting a lot of this, but like from not being in the same mental headspace, for the sake of writing, this memoir? And then the second part of that question is, what was it like when you finished writing it? I mean, you've been writing this for your entire life, as you've said. What do you do after the nap? After you've externalized it.
Well said.
Yeah.
I'll answer the second one first, and then I'll forget the first one, and you're going to remind me. Okay. So when I underestimated myself. I thought that I would really fall apart when I finished, when I put it out into the world. But on the other hand, I have not. And I think, I have not fallen apart. I think also what's funny is that people ask me, because there's a certain level of candor in this, I talk about everything. And they say, God, well, how does it feel having everyone know literally everything about you and all the nasty stuff? And it didn't occur to me at the time that I was allowed to say anything but everything. It sort of felt like if I didn't, and it still feels like if I don't tell everyone everything about myself, I don't exist fully, which is a dangerous game. And So I don't fully know what I've done or understand what I've done. But I don't really understand much. I mean, I don't understand how I don't understand waking up in the morning. I don't understand how I'm speaking to you right now. So I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with doing things I have no idea how to do. So I held it. I feel okay, which is really might seem silly and mundane, but that's a real shock to me. And I think the experience of reading it back, I remember the first one. Okay, good. The experience of reading it back. I mean, I allowed myself a moment to feel really proud, and I this has been little Alice's dream since she was 6 years old. So my partner, whenever I wasn't feeling the full, just the fullness of all of this, he'd go, little Alice, tell little Alice. And then I'd tell little Alice what was happening and how she wasn't in that place anymore and how she turned that place into this place. And that gets me every time. And I think also my mom died 2 years ago, and the only advice she ever gave me was just do the work. So the fact that I just did the work is how I stay connected to her. And this book is all about connection to the self and other people. So it continues to live its message. It's happening right now. So yeah, thank you for the question. That's a great question.
Who else? Oh, hey.
Hi.
Hi, Alice. You talked about this a little bit already, but I just wanted to ask more about some of the paradoxes about writing, like on a craft level, of writing about depersonalization or derealization. And like so many of the tools we have as writers are about getting into the body. But if you feel as a subject like you aren't in the body, then how do you translate that into craft, into scenes, into the tools that we have to write?
I don't know. It's a great question. It's really interesting because I keep wondering how much credit I give my depersonalization. Because it has made me this kind of dispassionate observer of my life. So I wonder sometimes what kind of writer I would be if I weren't sort of refracted and abstracted the way that I am, where if I didn't have constantly the inanimate version of myself watching me write. So that's why during writing, it's the one place I feel integrated. So yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that I'll have to think about more. And it's one that I don't even know if I want to know the answer to it, because whatever's happening, I think is working so far. So, and I've been dissociated. I've been in a chronic dissociative episode for 5 years now, and I haven't come out of it. And it's interesting because the first draft was written before I was chronically dissociated. And I thought, my God, I'm never going to be able to write again. Even though in the dissociative episodes, the only thing that kept me here was like, I would write anything. I would write lists. I would write lists of the things that the former me used to really like, from like food to jigsaw puzzles, whatever. So I'm really happy that despite the dissociation and the sobriety, because I don't know if any of you have gotten sober before, but there's always there was a fear for me of, oh my God, am I going to be able to write? So all of these things that I've shed, identity, self, substances, meds, the writing stays. And I don't have, thank God, I don't know how, but I'm really happy about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia. I thought it was really interesting how like you compared your initial like short story collection as like clinical versus like the what came from that, which seems more like intimate and raw and personal and human. And on one hand, I see the clinicalness as maybe like a way, or I don't know, and maybe this is drawn upon my own experience, but like to sort of like shroud the trauma in something that feels like safer to write, and also like it's easier to be perceived with that clinical, there's less at stake for you personally. But I'm wondering if like what if you come at like writing with like a new like I don't know, what has evolved since like your clinical I don't even know how to say it, but like from when you were like writing from like a more clinical perspective to like just being okay with just having things being raw and as they are, is it more like experience and the shedding of those like anxieties, or is it like something different or something crafty?
It's something so cheesy. I mean, I feel I'm in a relationship where I feel unbelievably safe and seen. And because of that, I was able to remove so many of the things that kept me at a distance from myself and from the work. So I'm really able, and also like just keeping it. So I got really good advice once, and it was, you're allowed to be warm and direct. And I didn't know that I was allowed to take the shortest point from A to B, from me to you. I thought it had to be circuitous. I thought it had to be convoluted, because I felt circuitous and convoluted. Like I couldn't find my way to myself. So that maze was the only route that I was familiar with. And then I realized I can just say the thing that I feel, and I can just feel the thing that I feel. The world's not going to end. No one's going to think I'm stupid. And that was really powerful. And to just deploy, I think I was really insecure. I was a really insecure writer. And yeah, I mean, that's also a great question. I think the warmth and the directness are things I feel in my body and in my relationships. And the most important relationship to me is my writing. So that would not be exempt from that kind of warming up. So it's, yeah, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Anyone else? Anyone else?
The description, hi, I'm Celia.
Hi, Cecilia.
The description of your parents' house is extraordinary. And the way you describe the kind of control it exerts over you, even when your parents aren't there, was just incredible. Have you always been hyper aware of like the spaces you're in, or is that something that you got from your parents as artists? Or
this is a really interesting question. Well, two things. One, that opening set piece I wrote in a day, and it remained exactly the same because it was out of like a desperate pivot. And that was the beginning of the transition from the clinical to what it became. I have no spatial awareness. I never know where I am. I'm totally oblivious to most things. I mean, I'm walking down the street and I'll just walk into someone. So it's really odd that I decided to walk through this space. But I feel I know it. Like, talk about being enwombed. That was where I gestated. That was, with my sibling, the purebred Welsh Terrier that would eat its own shit and then attack you if you tried to stop it. Like there was the abuse paintings that hung in our hallway. I mean, I'm not spatially aware. So yeah, so this was really uniquely Charles Street because it was more than a house. It was, as you were saying, a character. And it was sometimes I was a very lonely child, and it was sometimes my only friend. So yeah.
And from the outside, it sounds like so glamorous. Like it sounds like it's out of a Robert Altman film or something, but for you, it must have been horrendous.
Well, it's interesting, that kind of misinterpretation, because exactly right. It's this glamour. It's this, I mean, let's be real, like there was tremendous privilege, and I would not be alive were it not for that privilege. But it's the same misunderstanding where people will have a conversation with me and they won't believe that I am not here. I am not present. So it's the same kind of like sleight of hand where I'm like, haha, you think I'm real, but really I'm not. And it's, you know, the same thing where this is glamorous and this is perfect, but actually all of these people are, you know, totally fucked up. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, let's.
Fun. Thank you so much, guys.
Talk among themselves.